Good morning, everyone. We're delighted to have you joining us today for this webinar on the update for potential revisions of teacher certification regulations in New York State. My name is Andrea LaChance. I'm the immediate past president of NIACTE. And before we get started with the presentation, I want to turn it over to my colleagues, Dr. Christina Pfister from the College of St. Rose, who's the president of the New York State Association of Teacher Educators, and Dr. Jacob Easley, who is the president of the New York Association of Colleges for Teacher Education, so that they can offer their welcome.
Good morning, everyone. I want to thank you for joining us today. As Andrea said, I'm Christina Pfister. I'm a professor of teacher education at the College of St. Rose in Albany, and I'm also I'm here today as the president of NISATE. And as you may know, NISATE, the New York State Association of Teacher Educators, is the organization for individual membership in New York State, and we represent the views of teachers and teacher educators throughout the state. So I'm delighted that you're here today, and I'll pass it off to Dr. Jacob Easley.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jacob Easley II. Thank you, Christina, for that introduction. I am president of NIACTE, and as you know, NIACTE is an institutional member organization within the state. We focus on advocacy and support for high-quality educator preparation. If your EPP has not renewed its membership or is interested in membership, please reach out to us. And we are happy to have you here today. So I'm going to share a bit of logistics for today. This webinar will be recorded, and the information will be shared following the webinar, including materials from this session. There's a Q&A in which you're able to submit questions, and we will try to answer those questions, but you will not be able to open your mics as part of this webinar. And with that, we have a wonderful facilitator you've already heard from today, Dr. Andrea LaChance. And Dr. LaChance, I will turn it back over to you for facilitation.
Great, thank you, Jacob. As you can see that, as Dr. Rivera-Wilson also let you know, there will be a copy of today's recording posted on the NISATE and NIACTE websites. We'll also email it to all of you since you're registered for this webinar, and also on the Atlas website at SUNY Albany. Again, as Dr. Easley said, any questions you want answered, you should put in the Q&A, so that we will try and get to as many of them as possible. The way this session will work is the speakers will do the presentation first, and we'll wait to the end of the presentation to have the Q&A period. With that, I'd like to introduce our panelists, and we are really very grateful for their time. They're incredibly busy folks, and they've really been very generous in sharing their time and this information with us. So joining us is Dr. Bill Murphy, who's the Deputy Commissioner for Higher Ed at New York State Education Department, and Alex Tricolinas, who is the Assistant Commissioner for Teacher and Leader Development. And so with no further delay, I'll have them take over and do their presentation. Thank you so much.
Great, and thank you, Andrea, Jacob, and Christina. This is coming on the heels of a great conference that you just had, and we kind of offered a little bit of a glimpse of some of the general changes that we're considering, and we'd really like to follow that up with a much more detailed presentation of what are some of the changes that we're currently considering. And from what I understand, I believe that in the chat they are posting a memo, which is actually a much more detailed view of what these changes are, and hopefully after Alex goes through the slides, we'll be able to have a good healthy Q&A session and go through some of the initial questions and concerns and follow-up questions. So basically, I just wanted to kind of set the context. As many of you know, we have been looking at updating, streamlining, improving our teacher certification system for the past 3 years at least, very aggressively. And it started off, some of them started off, as you know, as temporary measures to kind of get us through the pandemic. And then other things were much more structural. And they were very broad-based. And what I mean by that is they went across all the different certification areas, whether it was pupil personnel services, our teaching assistants, our teaching titles, our CTE titles. And it also went across the three main components of certification, which include examination, education, and experience. And that's what we're looking to continue to do here in this next phase of how we want to modernize and update and improve our teacher certification system. And as you know, this is a very complex undertaking when it comes to teacher certification, when you compare it to a lot of other licensed professions. And that's because this goes across our whole K-12 system, P-12 system, and then obviously up into our higher ed system and into the workforce and the issues related to pre-service and in-service for our teachers and our pupil personnel service and our leaders. So we're going to go through the main components. There's about 6 of them. It touches on examination, and then we get into trying to streamline our teaching assistant framework, which right now is, we got a lot of different levels, and folks are even having a hard time understanding it, let alone trying to, come up with ways to say, how do we really tap into this grow your own movement for teaching assistants, and to make sure that we can get TAs certified if indeed that is what their goal is. And then we get into some transitional and alternative program models and our transition from initial to professional certification, and how we might update and improve that and make it so that the barriers that might be in the way to deal with a lot of the teacher pipeline and shortage issues, that we're approaching this, in a real comprehensive, collaborative manner. So, so without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Alex. Alex can kind of, guide us through a number of these proposals here, the components of it. And then we're going to make sure that we've got time in the end to go through some of the more comprehensive feedback. We've gotten some already, some initial feedback, and we want to make sure that we're approaching this really, as I mentioned, collaboratively, and we want to make sure that we convey this to the Board of Regents and senior leadership at the department, so they get a clear picture of what are the thoughts are from not only from our K-12, P-12 side, but also from our teacher preparation programs and higher ed in general. So, Alex?
Great. Thank you, Bill, and good morning, everyone. So like Bill said, right, you all know we've been over the past several years working to make changes to the certification requirements to try to address the challenges that school systems are facing in staffing their schools. And that work was good and important, and I think it helped us get through the pandemic, but it also really raised questions for us about whether we need to take a more holistic view of the certification system to try to remove barriers that have sort of built up over time that prevent qualified and interested individuals from entering or remaining in the profession. And then we also have the same goal we've always had, which is to streamline the certification process and make it more easy to navigate for candidates, right? And so before we get into the what of these proposals, I want to pause just for a minute. We've done several of these conversations, as Bill said, and I think it may be helpful just to frame the proposals for you all in a general way before we get into the specific details. And so when we think about what we're trying to accomplish with this work, really it starts with something that's very simple, which is we know that when we look at what happens in schools, nothing really is more important than the teachers and the school leaders that are in our schools in classrooms working with kids on a daily basis, right? And so when we think about our goal of wanting all students to be successful, that starts with ensuring that students have equitable access to qualified, experienced, and effective teachers and school leaders, right? And certification is an important part of that process because it helps us to sort of establish the minimum standards and criteria that someone needs to satisfy to enter and remain in the profession, right? And so as we think about our certification system, we need to think about it in a way of how it supports that goal of ensuring that students have equitable access to well-prepared, diverse, effective teachers and school leaders, right? And so as we go through these proposals, I think you'll see how they're informed by that broader goal. So to get into it, the first thing we're going to talk about is the teaching assistant certificate progression. So as Bill mentioned, this proposal really is grounded in the idea of trying to strengthen and establish a pathway for teaching assistants who are interested in becoming teachers to ultimately do so. And so really the first part of this really is just about streamlining certification. As you all know, right now we have level 1, 2, and 3 TA certificates, and then there's also a pre-professional certificate. That multi-level certificate process for teaching assistants is really, I think, confusing for a lot of TAs to navigate. There isn't necessarily a clear distinction between what somebody who holds the different levels of certification, what they've done to obtain those certificates. And it's also completely different from the certificate progression that we have in the other educator titles. And so part of this proposal really is just about mapping the TA certificate levels onto the initial and professional certificate progression that we have for teachers, right? And so again, using that same terminology across certificate areas helps, I think, bring coherence to the system. And so going along with that transition from the multi-level system to the initial and professional structure, what we would be looking to do with the professional TA certificate is to establish more specific education requirements so that as TAs progress from their initial to their professional certificate, they've actually completed some of the specific education requirements that they would ultimately have to satisfy if they decided to become a teacher. And what we mean by that really is right now, in order for a TA to get the level 3 certificate, they need to have 18 semester hours of college coursework, but that 18 semester hours can be in anything. It doesn't have to be related to the content or the pedagogy that they would need to ultimately be a teacher. So what we would be looking to do here really would be to put a frame around that 18 credit hours and say that if you want to progress to the professional certificate, you need to complete 18 semester hours of coursework, but that coursework would have to be aligned with either content area knowledge related to teacher certification or pedagogical knowledge and skills. And specifically there, we're thinking about the foundational education courses that somebody would have to complete if they ultimately wanted to become a teacher. And so going along with establishing those more rigorous education requirements for the professional certificate, we would also be looking to allow TAs who hold the professional certificate to have an enhanced scope of practice. And really, again, they are teaching assistants. They would be working under the supervision and support of a teacher, but enhancing or expanding their scope of practice would allow for them to really for two things. One, they would be able to do work that was closer to the work of the teacher of record. So, working with small groups of students, designing lessons, those kinds of things, delivering segments of a lesson, again, all work done under the supervision of a teacher, but work that is closer to the work of a teacher. And really that will give them a greater exposure to the full role and responsibilities that teachers have, which will help them make a more informed decision about whether they want to become a teacher. But it will also ensure that that TAs who are in schools working with teachers are able to support teachers effectively, which is a pressing need for educators in the classroom. And then the last piece that goes along with this is because TAs who hold this professional certificate would have this enhanced scope of practice, we are also potentially looking to allow individuals who work under that professional TA certificate, who acquire a certain amount of experience, to have that experience satisfy the student teaching component of the initial teacher certificate. And again, that's consistent with this sort of theory that there should be an intentional pathway for TAs to become teachers. And the last part of this really is, we also know that there are plenty of teaching assistants who are not interested in becoming teachers, right? They just want to stay a teaching assistant. And there is actually a problem with the current certificate progression, the level 1, 2, and 3, which is that if TAs don't progress to the next level of certificate within a certain amount of time, they're never able to earn that certificate. And so they actually time out, and they're not able to continue to be TAs. So under this proposal, what we would also be looking to do is to sort of solve that problem and ensure that TAs who want to remain TAs are able to continue in that teaching assistant role. And the way that we would propose to do that would be by establishing a process for the reissuance of the initial certificate, and allowing for individuals who hold that initial TA certificate to have that certificate be continuously renewable on 5-year cycles, so long as they complete a certain amount of CTLE or college coursework, right? And so that will ensure that individuals who are TAs and who are interested in staying TAs are able to do so. And then the very last part of this proposal, going along with this idea of establishing a new professional TA certificate, is to allow for institutions of higher education, which would include all of our educator preparation programs, but also community colleges, allowing these institutions to register programs that lead to the professional TA certificate, again, that are a combination of content area coursework that's aligned with the initial teaching certificate, as well as pedagogical coursework. And so again, by packaging those as a designed program of study, TAs who complete those programs would be well prepared to take on those enhanced responsibilities that they would have under that professional TA certificate. So moving on to the next potential reform here, this one relates to the certification examinations that candidates are required to take and pass in order to earn a New York State teaching certificate. And just so you all understand the rationale or where this work came out of, really this proposal came out of some of the work that we've done to try to enhance the endorsement of certificates for out-of-state candidates. When we looked at the barriers for folks who were interested in becoming New York State teachers, who already held certificates in other states, one of the primary barriers for those candidates is that they already hold a certificate in another state, they've completed an educator preparation program, and they've taken and passed certification exams. But in order to come into New York State, if they don't already have 3 years of full-time teaching experience, they are required to take and to sit for and pass the New York State teacher certification exams in the subject area of the certificate. And very often that's enough to discourage these individuals from choosing to pursue New York State certification. So the next proposal that we have here really is to allow for candidates to take and pass either the New York State teacher certification exam in the subject area of the certificate that they're seeking, or to take and pass a certification exam in the subject area that the department has determined is an acceptable alternative examination. And so, when we look across the country, there's a couple of things we know. The first is no one else takes a New York State teacher certification exam other than individuals who are enrolled in our EPPs or are seeking to obtain a New York State teaching certificate, right? So anyone who comes in from out of state, by and large, before they decide to become a New York State teacher, they have not taken a New York State certification exam. And what we also know is that there are many well-established national and state certification exams. And so under this proposal, what we would be looking to do really would be to identify examinations that we believe are comparable to the New York State teacher certification exams. And again, allowing for those tests, if candidates pass them at the proper cut score, allowing for those tests to substitute for the New York State teacher certification exams, right? And so again, we would be determining that the exams are acceptable. We would be ensuring that they're valid and reliable, and that the test frameworks are comparable to the New York State teacher certification exams. And we believe that that will have a measurable impact on our ability to recruit candidates from out of state to come into New York State. So the next proposal here relates to how teachers obtain additional teaching certificates in another content area. And this proposal came out of work that we did a little more than a year ago related to the 7 through 12 science certificate. So as you all know, a little more than a year ago, we changed the requirement for individuals to obtain additional science certificates by shifting the number of credit hours in the additional content area from 30 semester hours to 18 semester hours. These individuals do still have to take and pass the New York State content specialty test. But we did see, a significant impact in the field from implementing this change on the science certificates. And so what this proposal would do is it would expand that to other content area certificates. So examples are things like, a foreign language teacher, a French teacher who also has a background in Spanish, right? They could obtain a Spanish certificate by going through, this process where they wouldn't need 30 semester hours. They could have 18 semester hours plus passing the content specialty test. Similarly, right, think about the relationships between math and computer science or math and physics, right? So there are a number of examples we could think through, but generally, the idea here would be for content area certificates. Individuals would be able to obtain additional certificates by having 18 semester hours in the content area and taking and passing the certification exams. And the reason we settled on 18 for the proposal really is that 18 is the equivalent of a minor in the content area. And then going along with this, we were also looking to allow for or ensure that teacher preparation programs are able to offer dual or multiple certificate area programs. And we know from talking to EPPs that one of the challenges with doing that, particularly as we look to increase the number of days for clinical practice, one of the challenges with multiple certificate programs is the requirement that a candidate have a student teaching placement in each of the certificate areas. So what we're also looking to do with this proposal is to say that individuals who are enrolled in your teacher preparation programs who are completing a multiple certificate area program They would not necessarily need to have a student teaching experience in each of the additional certificate areas. And again, for most certificates, we're thinking here mostly about content area certification. And then the other thing that this would do is it would make the approved program pathway for certification consistent with the individual evaluation pathway. Candidates who come through the individual evaluation pathway already have this flexibility. And so this would just really align the approved program pathway with the individual evaluation pathway. So moving on to the next proposal. The next proposal relates to the professional teacher certificate. So as you all know, New York State has a certificate progression for teaching certificates, right? Individuals progress from an initial to a professional certificate. The theory behind certificate progression is that as someone obtains higher levels of certification, they are obtaining that additional level of certification because they have demonstrated that they have knowledge and skill that makes them more effective at their job, right? And so when we think about teaching, it's that they have additional content area or pedagogical knowledge and skill that make them more effective working with students in the classroom. And so for us here in New York, there are two components to that progression. One is the experience requirement, 3 years, at least 3 years of full-time teaching experience in the area of the certificate. And then there is the education requirement, which currently there is only one way to satisfy the education requirement, and that is by obtaining a what we call an acceptable master's degree, which is a master's degree in the content area of their certificate, a related content area, an unrelated area, but with a certain number of additional graduate credits, or there are certain master's degrees, curriculum and instruction, special education that are applicable to all content areas. So what this proposal seeks to do is to expand the pathways that exist for someone to progress to the professional certificate. So rather than only being able to obtain the professional certificate by completing the master's degree, this proposal seeks to establish additional equally rigorous pathways for teachers to meet the education requirement for the professional certificate. And the two pathways that you see on this slide, the first one is the teacher could obtain national board certification in the subject area of the certificate sought. And so when we think about why that may be an acceptable, equally rigorous pathway here, again, it's important to think about the purpose of certificate progression, right? It's for the certificate holder to demonstrate that they have additional knowledge and skill that makes them more effective at their job. And so we know that individuals who hold national board certification have gone through a rigorous process directly related to their practice and the area of their certificate, and that they've met established competencies that signal that they are a more effective educator. And we also know that there's that research has been done on the effectiveness of national board certified educators, which shows that in many instances they are more effective in the classroom working with students. And so that seemed to us a natural potential additional pathway for the professional certificate. And then the third one, which you see here, is allowing for initial certificate holders to complete a set of acceptable graduate level courses and or department approved credentials that are related to either the content area of their certificate or that are in pedagogical practices. Those credentials could be issued by an institution of higher education that has an educator preparation program, but they could also be issued by New York State districts and BOCES, assuming that they meet the minimum standards and criteria that are established by the state education department. And then you also see here on this slide that if somebody were to go through this third pathway, they would need to obtain the equivalent of 450 clock hours of graduate coursework or credentials. And the reason for the 450 clock hours is that when we look at graduate level coursework, there is a correspondence of, one graduate semester hour is the equivalent of 15 clock hours. And so when we think about a master's degree, which is 30 credit hours, that is then the equivalent of 450 clock hours, right? And so again, the idea here is to establish multiple pathways, but all of those pathways would be comparable and equally rigorous, right? And then the very last thing is about that third option is the idea here really is to establish a pathway for teachers to progress the professional certificate that is grounded in the educator acquiring additional knowledge and skill that makes them more effective at working with students. And so this proposal is also designed to incentivize the creation of high quality mentoring and induction programs in the early part of educators' careers that will help them to sort of bridge the gap between their initial teacher education and the knowledge and skill that they need to be effective practitioners. And we know that high quality mentoring and induction is associated both with improved effectiveness in the early part of educators' careers, but also mentoring and induction, when done well, are also about retaining teachers. And so when we think about these proposals, again, this is as much about creating pathways for individuals to enter the profession as it is about establishing high retention pathways for individuals to enter and remain in the profession. So that is the proposal around professional certificates. So the next proposal relates to transitional certificates. So there's really two components to this. The first is we would be looking under this proposal to establish a new transitional teacher certificate that really is designed to streamline the transitional certification process. So you all know there are several transitional pathways for individuals to become teachers. There are also transitional pathways related to school district business leadership and the school district leader certificate, right? So there's lots of different transitional pathways. And what we've done really is we've labeled those with letters, but those letters don't clearly correspond to, to what the certificate what the aspiring teacher is looking to do, right? So they don't signal anything to potential teachers about what is the right pathway for me to become a teacher. So part of this really is just about terminology. It's about streamlining the different transitional programs into well-defined pathways that are called something that is actually related to the certificate, right? So you'd have a transitional teacher pathway, you'd have a transitional school district business leader pathway, you'd have a transitional school district leader pathway. But going along with that, within that transitional teacher pathway, what this proposal would do is it would also establish a new pathway that doesn't currently exist for what we're calling alternative joint providers. And these alternative joint provider programs would be programs that are offered by an institution of higher education working in collaboration with a school district, BOCES, or other nonprofit professional education organization. And so these would be partnership preparation programs for educators that are going through the transitional teacher pathway. I think the key feature that distinguishes this alternative provider model from the existing transitional B and C model is that these programs would not necessarily lead to a degree. So there's a couple of important things with that. The first is because these programs do not lead to a degree, the only individuals who could go through this pathway would be candidates who already hold a bachelor's degree. But then the other thing that's important or potentially impactful about not requiring these programs to culminate in a degree is that you are essentially allowing for a model that is not tied to a certain number of credit hours or some of the existing requirements for degree programs. And the reason why that's potentially important is because what it would allow for is it would allow for teacher education programs that are really tailored to both the needs of the candidates coming through the pathway, but also these are programs that could be really closely tailored to the needs of the school system, right? And so we are still under this proposal talking about programs that are well designed and carefully constructed. They would have to meet all of the same requirements that exist in Part 5221 of our regulation related to the registration of teacher education programs. Again, but because they do not lead to a degree, the way that providers satisfy those requirements can look different. And what that would really allow for is it would allow for that sort of deep education around learning theory and development and teaching methods and the content area. But it would also at the same time allow for teacher candidates going through this pathway to really have in-depth tailored clinical experiences that help them to really translate that theory into practice in real time, working under the supervision of an experienced mentor teacher, to really ensure that they're getting a high quality preparation to be an educator. And then again, the reason why this is within the transitional teacher framework is because really when we think about this and allowing candidates to go through this is really about attracting individuals into the profession who are more non-traditional. So when we think about that TA to teacher pathway, when we think about career changers, individuals who are coming to teaching later in their career with an existing established education and work experience, preparing those individuals to be teachers can look different than the traditional sort of teacher education programs. And so that is the proposal around transitional certificates. And so the very last thing that we wanted to discuss as a potential idea here before we get into the Q&A relates to administrator certification. So currently in New York State, we have 3 different types of administrator certificates. We have a building leader certificate, a district leader certificate, and then we also have a school district business leader certificate. Each of those certificates has its own unique scope of practice. And so this, the establishment of these different kinds of administrator certificates was done many years ago at a time when there were much clearer distinctions in the field between the roles and responsibilities of building leaders versus district leaders. And what we know is that over time, those lines have become blurred significantly within school systems. And so there are often cases that arise where an individual holds a building leader license, but the district believes they would be an effective a district leader in some capacity working across buildings to support different initiatives, and they're unable to step into that role because they only have the building leader license, or vice versa, right? And so really this proposal is about the building leader and district leader certificates. It sets aside the school district business leader certificate because that's not really a pedagogical administrator certificate, right? And so when we look at the SBL and the SDL certificates, what this proposal would do is it would replace the SBL and SDL certificates with a new professional administrator certificate. And anyone who holds that professional administrator certificate would be able to undertake either building level or district level leadership positions. And so in doing so, there's really two benefits here. The first is that it would create additional flexibility for school districts to assign administrators to positions that they need them to fill. Again, these individuals would be trained, prepared and able to do either building level or district level work. And so it creates flexibility within the administrative structure. And then the other thing that it would allow for is it would allow for there to be a sort of natural pipeline within school systems for taking individuals who are successful building leaders and who have the dispositions and ability to be an effective district leader. And it would create the ability for there to be a natural pathway to train those building leaders over time to take on district administration roles. And then the last thing that this does is it would address the current issue with the building leader and district leader certificates, which is that the building leader certificate has a progression, but the district leader certificate does not. And so what has happened in practice, and the way that this feels for building leader certificate holders, is that there are additional requirements to be a building leader than there are to be a district leader, which feels inequitable, right? And so by establishing a single certificate and eliminating that progression, we would be solving that challenge. And so with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we can move along to the Q&A portion.
Thanks, Alex. That was a lot. And there's quite a bit of chatter in the Q&A. What I've done is, for the first couple topics anyway, is to collapse some of the questions so that there's not repetition, and try to go in order of the topics as you covered them. I'm going to ask my colleagues, Jerry and Christine, if they might look at the chat further down on the Ed Leadership and Trans B discussions, because I didn't get that far. But we'll start off again with some general questions. And some questions are combined, some are really straightforward. But let me start with one I think that's a overarching one. What is the expected timeline for implementation of these proposed changes?
Yeah, that's a great question. And Bill, I don't know if you want to handle that one.
Yeah. So basically, we're at that stage now where these are conceptual frameworks, and they obviously have not been put in front of the Board of Regents, for their consideration. So my best guess is we don't know until we see the final Regents agendas exactly what is going to make it on in which month. But my guess is in either the December or January Regents meeting, we would present a number of these conceptual framework certification amendment changes. And it would really be more for them to look at them the same way our stakeholder groups are looking at them, like we are now, and to offer them, the details of what it would entail related to examination or TA or transitional or professional certificates. And then there could be some things like we already, just starting out with our stakeholder groups, we actually had a couple components that were within each one of these. We had to pull out already because they just weren't fully ready to be put in front of the Board of Regents. So, so I think that's ultimately what's going to happen is, we're going to make a presentation. We don't know whether it's going to be completely reflective of all the items that we've got right now in our slide deck and in our memorandum that we've got attached here. But that'll be the first step. We don't want to make any suggestions that like in December, that we're going to, by December, that we're going to have amendments that are going to be put in front of the Board of Regents, because that's not the way we're trying to roll this out. We want to make sure that this is fully reflective of the stakeholder groups, in the districts and in our colleges, and with the various leadership and groups such as NYSBA and others. So, that's where we are right now. And then those that are going to move forward would likely be done, sometime in 2024, and it would probably happen, in a kind of step-by-step fashion where it wouldn't be all done as like an umbrella package. We would look at the ones that seem to be ones that have more convergence of embracing them. We would put or may not have as much complexity related to them, and we would put like those items first. And then for the others that are also reflective of what the board and the senior leadership at the department and others want to move forward, they might progress in some of the in some of the further months going into 2024.
Thanks, Bill. Another kind of broad question before we get to the specifics is, as you have worked on and made analysis to make these recommendations for policy changes in regards to teacher certification and preparation, what types, if any, political pressure have you felt from school districts and potentially their legislative partners around making these changes?
Yeah, so I don't know if I'd frame it as political pressure. I would say it's more a progression, a natural progression of we're very active, engaging sometimes on a monthly basis with a number of the stakeholder groups, whether it's NISCUS or SANES, the school administrators, or NYSBA, the school board administration, and others that are reflective of, faculty and teachers in the districts and pupil personnel services and TAs. And then, of course, we're very active engagement with the colleges and the teacher preparation programs, whether that's through CICU or SUNY or CUNY, and also making sure that we're building in the feedback. Some of these actually have been being considered and for over a year now, like the TA one, the teaching assistant one, that goes back probably well over a year, where we had a framework that's similar to what Alex showed on the slide deck, but with a little bit of tweaking to it. And then, of course, as you mentioned, Andrea, then we start to hear also from the unions like NYSET, and UUP and others. And we try our best to basically say, we know that some of these proposals, whether they're policy or regulatory amendments, we know that we've got actually some good, universal, optimistic opinions on. And then others, there is a split. Same way that it's happened, like when we did our all grade bands for special education, all grade bands for literacy. We know that we didn't get, as much convergence as we got, like say on the whole EdTPA, shifting that from the examination side, into incorporating it into the into the teacher preparation program clinical experiences. So really that's ultimately, how these changes have kind of, come together. And I will say, just overall, it's no secret and no surprise that we are being asked to innovate and be agile and that it's nothing new. Like there's alternative teacher preparation programs, have been around for a long time, but it seems to be just picking up pace related to like residencies, apprenticeships, different models for transitional certificates that allow districts to get people in the classrooms, sooner than they typically would get into the classroom. And so, we're trying to strike that balance to say, look, how do we do this with fidelity, making sure that they've got the pedagogical skills, that they've got the content area skills, and that we do it through a lens of social equity, which is also a very important component of this. You know, we put out our educator diversity report, and I will say we're just not making as much progress at the pace that we want to with the diversity of not only our educator workforce, but also our leadership structure, you know, with the school district leaders and school building leaders. So, you know, this as well as trying to, you know, solve that as well, to come up with different creative solutions.
Great, thanks, Bill. So that's a good segue into talking about some of the questions around TAs and paraprofessionals. First, the question is, some districts don't have TAs, they only go with paraprofessionals. Does the proposals that you were talking about with TAs also include paraprofessionals?
Yeah, Alex, do you want to take that? I know that's especially relevant when you talk about like the New York City school district. They often refer to them as paraprofessionals, but you know, I think sometimes it's just the nomenclature of what they're referred to, but our licensing structure is still the same. So you want to take that, Alex?
Yeah, no, that's right, Bill. So yeah, we are talking in terms of the state certification mechanism. So that, from our perspective, that's the TA certificates, right? There are teacher aides and other paraprofessionals that sometimes work in schools that are not TAs. But when we talk about this pathway, it's in the context of our state certification framework. And so it's about teaching assistant to teacher pathways. But very often when folks, to Bill's point, in some areas when they talk about paraprofessionals, they mean TAs, even if they don't call them TAs.
Great. And so along those lines, it seems like multiple questions around the substitution of student teaching for a year of folks working under the professional certificate, I believe, for TAs. Mm-hmm. So the questions are, is that a standalone requirement, or was that a requirement that had to be embedded in a registered program?
Yeah, that's a great.
Yeah, you get it.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think our preliminary thinking on this is that this would really be for individuals who end up going through the individual evaluation pathway, right? Yeah, so the question of whether or not, if you have a TA who enrolls in your ed prep program and they remain a TA, whether or not you all consider that experience they have working under the TA certificate as the equivalent of your substitute teaching or your student teaching placement, like that's going to be a program design consideration question that you all have to address.
So that leads to, I think, to the other concern. So you're saying this would really be an option through the individual pathway for someone who had gone and got their bachelor's degree, fulfilled through the individual pathway the content and pedagogy requirements prescribed by them. They would be able to get an attestation, much like I think you were saying it exists now for 40 days of paid teaching that's signed off by a district official can count in the individual pathway. This would be parallel. So not necessarily a TA going out and doing a year's experience and then getting a teaching license, but they would have to meet all the other requirements for the individual pathway, and that a year's experience as a TA would count for that.
That's correct. And the other thing I want to be clear about, which it isn't clear on the slides, I want to be clear about, is one of the requirements under this proposal, one of the requirements for somebody to get the professional certificate is the same as the current level 3 requirement. They have to have 3 years of experience working as a TA before they can even get the professional. And then it's the 1 year of professional level experience that could substitute through the individual evaluation pathway.
Okay. So in theory, that would mean someone who applies for, say, an ENL license through the individual pathway could fulfill all the content and pedagogy requirements for that certificate, but would the year of work as a TA have to be in the content area of the certificate? So would they have to have done a year of work in an ENL classroom?
That's a great question. I think I mean I would I think there's probably more dialogue we could have about that. I think when we think about the ENL, or maybe like somebody looking to get a students with disabilities certificate, there may be an argument to say that those individuals need to have the experience working with that student population. So I think I understand where the question is going. We would be looking to treat this the same way, though. Just I think conceptually we were thinking about it is we would treat this the same way, like you said, Andrea, as we currently treat the substitution of district substitute teaching or whatever as being able to satisfy the requirement.
Great. There's several more questions about the paraprofessionals, but I want to try and get at least some questions for each of the categories. So around the issue of testing, is it the intention to keep the Educating All Students test, or could that be substituted as well?
Yeah, that's
keep it right, Alex.
Yeah. That's correct. Yeah, I think there's really two exams that we were thinking there likely won't be comparable alternatives for. One is the EAS, and then the other is the bilingual education assessments. Those are probably we're not going to be able to determine that there are comparable tests offered. Certainly on a national level, there aren't. But yeah, so we would keep those exams, but we're unlikely to see there be comparable exams.
So similarly, would this ability to substitute exams for New York State exams, considering that they're acceptable, apply to all candidates in all programs, or just out-of-state candidates?
Yeah, another great question. So although this did come out of our thinking through how to improve reciprocity, for ease of implementation, the way we're thinking about this is it would be available to any candidate. It wouldn't be limited only to out-of-state candidates.
Okay. And are there international teacher certification tests that might be relevant here, or are we just thinking national?
Yeah, I think we've been thinking about this in terms of other national assessments. Yeah.
Okay. And then there's one comment in terms of, and this has come up, I think, in other conversations around the data, and tracking the data for EPPs, which we all have to do around if there's different certification exams that are acceptable. Is there any thought to maybe narrowing some of those choices, or choosing one national test that would substitute in, so there wouldn't be so much different data?
Yeah, we do understand, particularly for the federal Title II reporting, the challenge that EPPs may face if you have folks taking all different kinds of exams. I think our thought initially was that we wouldn't limit it as long as we make the determination that the exam is comparable. We would allow the candidate to take the exam. But I think our hope here is that certainly when we think about exams that are administered by national testing corporations, so Pearson and ETS, that part of the conversation with those test vendors would certainly be about how that information is made available to both the state education department and to ed prep programs to satisfy federal reporting requirements. So we wouldn't be looking to create an additional administrative burden on you all to the extent that we could avoid that.
And just related to this whole certification exam issue, I think, you said it started with kind of observing this for interstate applicants. Is there data that you have or that you've used to look at, like, what percentage of our teachers coming in are coming in from out of state, or how many are we getting every year? Is that data something that you've used in this, and would you be willing to share what the numbers are?
Yeah, I don't have it in. I mean, we can certainly follow up, I think, on that point with you all, but we don't, because I don't have it right in front of me. But we do look at it, right? Annually, we look at, and even more frequently than that, but we look at how many folks are coming in through each of the available pathways. And one of the interesting things about the out-of-state pathways, and again, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but what we see is a fair number of folks who apply for certification from out of state. It's still not a huge number, but we do see a fair number of applications, but the conversion rate of those into issued certificates is fairly low, and so the exam is part of the reason for that low conversion rate, because individuals who are interested apply, then they realize, oh wait, I have to take additional exams, and then they never complete the application process.
Yeah, and I think, Andrea, the overall kind of thread of a lot of these questions, I will say, is it's going to take us a little bit of time here, depending on what exam we're talking about. It might take us a little longer than others, and it might be a little more complex than others for us to say, you know what, we think we're at the point where now we've got another optional exam, depending on what discipline it is, and a lot of what you just mentioned goes into that. We need to look at some of the data. We need to, for example, one that's obviously really complex right now is any of the licensing exams related to, like when we look at our multi-subject exams and you look at like language acquisition and math, and you start to look at like the praxis and compare it to the nicety exams, what are the pass rates on those? And we need to really, measure all that out and then do the crosswalk between, what are our standards, what are our learning standards, and, do they align appropriately? Because we certainly do not want to be in a position where, we start to see, unintended consequences of, failure rates that, were much higher than we anticipated on those, So it's again, the more we can kind of get ahead of it and say, if we are able to move that along a little sooner, it does not mean that that you're going to have an overnight, change in the whole assessment system. It's going to kind of incrementally take place, even if that is voted in,
Right. Okay, moving into the content section, wasn't as many questions around this, but I think a question that illustrates most of the concern is this example. So if someone has a childhood ed cert 1 to 6, but then they had a minor in chemistry, which had 18 hours in it, would they then just be able to apply for the additional certificate with just the 18 hours and no practicum at that, at the secondary level?
Yeah, so the short answer is as we've currently thought about this, the answer in that case would potentially be yes, because the additional certificate is a content area certificate. I do understand the concern about crossing the developmental levels. I think I know what the concern is here. But we weren't necessarily thinking to limit that for the content area certificates. So yeah, if they had the 18 semester hours, and again, they have to take and pass the content specialty test, which does include, it's the 7 to 12, in that example, it would be the 7 to 12 chemistry test. There are some pedagogical content area questions on that exam, in addition to just the pure content questions, Yeah.
And there's also another data related question. So this change was kind of predicated on the reduction in the science content that science teachers could get another science discipline with 18 content hours. So the question was, since that change has gone into effect, has there been an increase in the number of certified science teachers you're seeing go through?
Yeah, I know, again, we don't have the numbers in front of us. We know anecdotally from speaking with school superintendents that they've found, and BOCES DSs, that they've found this change to be helpful, that it has helped them to address some of the staffing challenges. We'd have to look at the data to say, what number of, was there an increase? And then even if there was an increase, like what number of those came through the additional certificate path? But there's an analysis that would need to be done there to nail down, that exact question.
I think folks would love to see some, some of the results of some of those changes if there is data available at some future time, because, I think there's understanding of why, some of these revisions are happening, but what impact they have, I think, has been a concern. If we change things and then nothing happens, we could be lowering standards or changing programs without the impact that we wanted. So, and that data question has come up several times in the Q&A. Moving on to the options for professional certification, which, as you can imagine, there's a fair amount of questions here. So I wanted to make sure to get to those. I think there's a repeated theme in the questions around the quality assurance with the 450-hour option. What are the intentions of SED to make sure that the 450 hours are equivalent to the rigor and depth of a master's program?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that question, and I'll start with what I said when we were presenting the slides, right? Which is the point of this is to establish multiple equally rigorous pathways for an individual to satisfy the education component of the progression to the professional certificate, right? So the idea here isn't to create an easier, in the sense of less rigorous, pathway for someone to get a professional certificate. So I just want to start with that general framing here, right? These are supposed to multiple pathways equally rigorous. When we talk about how we propose to ensure that, again, like as Bill said, right, these are conceptual ideas at this point, but just so you all understand our initial thinking around this, the idea here would be a credential that is not graduate level coursework, a credential that would meet this requirement would have to be approved. The credential itself would have to be approved by the state education department. So one thing we're not talking about here is saying anyone who's an approved CTLE provider can offer a credential, right? That's not what we're saying here. These would be well-designed credentials. They have to be submitted to us as a credential, meaning there's a set of learning outcomes, there's a program of study, there's a set of learning experiences. We understand the modality of those learning experiences. There would have to be an assessment component to ensure that the individual who is going through the credential actually acquires the knowledge and skill that the credential is supposed to be equipping them with, right? So assessment aligned to learning objectives. And then we really would be looking for there to be for the credential provider to do some kind of, or maybe for the state education department to do some kind of program evaluation. So that could be surveys of teachers who go through the credential. It could be surveys of principals in the schools where they teach. There could be a data analysis component where we look at the retention of individuals who go through this pathway versus others, right? There's all kinds of different ways we can think about that, but the idea here is the two parts: quality assurance on the front end through the application process, that the credential is well designed, that we understand its learning objectives, that we believe that the experiences will equip people with the intended outcomes, and that there is some kind of assessment component for the candidate, right? So, and then on the back end, of course, like, it's one thing to design you all know this, right? It's one thing to design a program or a credential. It's another thing to actually make sure it works in practice, right? So we would be looking at it from both angles.
And Andrew, if you don't mind, Alex, can you offer an example of like something maybe creative, whether it's the new transitional cert that we're thinking about, or this, pathway to professional certification again, where you've got a kind of an innovative IEG district BOCES partnership. Maybe it could be micro credentials, maybe not, but what we might envision there for something that's creative and part of the solution for both in-service, pre-service type considerations.
Yeah, that's a great point. And yeah, and in the context of this third pathway for the professional certificate, Bill, you're exactly right. Like I know it says on the slide these could be developed by a district of OCs or an IHE, but again, part of what we're hoping to incentivize through this is an actual induction pathway for individuals from the initial to the professional. And so you could imagine that there's a set of micro credentials that an IHE creates in collaboration with a district around the key areas where new teachers need additional training and support, timely topics. We think about the science of reading, the culturally responsive pedagogy, all of these sort of social emotional learning. You could design sort of a set of micro credentials that are really designed in an intentional way to bridge that gap between the initial teacher education and effective practice, grounded in the needs of the district. And that could be that could be a partnership between higher ed and the district. It could help facilitate that P20 collaboration, right, that we're talking about. So Bill, you're absolutely right. I think there are models of this, and we could thinking about the transitional pathway in exactly the same way, right? Sort of customizing the education, the education of teacher candidates based both on the knowledge and skill that they have coming into their teacher education program, but then also based on the specific student population or the specific needs of the school district.
Great, thanks. Other questions related to the master's program are kind of these questions which in our state, we rely on folks to have to get the master's to get the professional certification, but it also provides a background for other areas such as administrative leadership at the district and building level. And so there's concern about will not requiring a master's degree and having this other option disrupt the administrator pipeline, and also questions about, for instance, in salary raises, will the 450 hours disadvantage people in terms of teachers, in terms of salary, and in terms of things like being eligible to teach AP courses?
Yeah, so I think I can take the second part first, which is we understand, of course, because the national board certification already exists, and there are collective bargaining agreements in districts that do already provide additional compensation for individuals who get national board certification. But because this idea of multiple pathways for the professional certificate does not currently exist, it is not currently incorporated into collective bargaining agreements, right? So I understand that. But again, the point of establishing multiple pathways is to allow the professional certificate to be the signal that the teacher has the additional knowledge and skill. So our hope here would be that collective bargaining certainly happens over time, but that over time, if there's additional remuneration that's currently aligned to obtaining the master's degree, that remuneration would apply to obtaining the professional certificate through any of the pathways, right? I think that's what we would say. As far as teaching AP courses, that is a district decision on the appropriate educator for the course, right? So there's nothing that would preclude somebody who got their professional certificate through stackable micro credentials. There's nothing that would preclude them from being able to teach an AP course, right? The district should be determining the best teacher for that course based on their teaching experience, their background, all of that, right? So our hope would be that, again, we understand right now there's only one way to do this. So these other things aren't currently incorporated into systems, but they should be over time if we move forward with something like this, right? So that's what I would say about the second one. On the first question, yeah, because we're not saying you can't get a master's degree, you can, but we do understand that when a teacher if we think about the hypothetical teacher, once this goes into effect, if I'm making a decision between getting a master's degree or going through a set of micro credentials, we understand that at the point in time when that decision is made, that person may not be thinking, one day I may want to be an administrator, and if I do, then eventually I'll need a master's degree, right? So or whatever, however you want to think about different permutations of that, right? So part of this is about ensuring that there is clear information for folks who would be navigating these pathways about what the best pathway is for them based on their interest in their teaching career and their future aspirations, right? But at the end of the day, it is probably the case, if we did this, that somebody would choose to get their professional certificate through micro-credentials, and that those micro-credentials were not offered by an IHE, or even if they were, that the IHE does not choose to accept those as credit toward a master's degree. And so then when they make the decision to become an administrator, they've got to go through a master's degree at that time. Like, yes, that is a distinct possibility, based on this. I don't think there's any way to necessarily avoid that if you establish multiple pathways.
Thanks. Just one thing that's popping up and occurred to me in terms of the AP courses. AP probably does sit at the district level, but adjuncting or dual credit courses that sometimes high school teachers offer. Most colleges require their adjuncts to have a minimum of a master's degree to be able to do that. So that would impact that as well.
And I will say, I don't want to, diminish, the concern related to, are we gonna have, some unintended consequences related to pinching the pipeline, because we do have that kind of natural organic pipeline related to folks who want to explore leadership titles. In many cases, we've got obviously a healthy pool of master's teachers because of our current requirement. So that is going to be something, obviously, I know that's been reflected already in some of the feedback that the Board of Regents is going to have to consider. And I will say, like, kind of, piggybacking on what Alex said, obviously I think we're one of 3 states right now that have a hard and fast requirement for the master's degree in order to get your professional cert. And you could maybe pick up another 15 or so states that have it in a different format related to, like, if you want to progress to like an advanced level certificate, you optionally can have your master's or other pathways similar to what we're thinking now. And I think what we've been finding just with the statistics too is we're trying to look at that, because it is a concern, as you mentioned. Are we going to have issues now with the pipeline for leadership? Basically to look at it and say, what do we think? What do we feel is going to happen here related to, trying to do some more innovative pathways? And the data does show that, like, even in other states, the majority of other states that do not have a master's component required, the majority of educators still get master's degrees. It's still showing those statistics. So there's still a strong, kind of thread and dynamic for teachers to say, what, we really do feel like, we want to get our master's degree, which, we're not trying to dissuade people to do that.
Great. And that does raise the other question around, is there data that shows that the master's degree, having that as a requirement, actually discourages people from going into teaching or stopping out of teaching?
Yeah, I mean, there has been some, again, particularly recently, there have been some studies done, particularly when we look at, Black or Hispanic, either teachers, individuals who obtain a certificate but don't complete the master's degree requirement, or were interested in a teaching career but chose not to pursue it. There are studies that have been done that show that these kinds of requirements are one of the reasons that they cite for choosing not to enter the teaching profession, right? So there are studies that have been done around that. I don't know that those are New York State specific.
Great, thank you. I am just checking to see if there's any I'm not seeing, sorry. I'm not seeing any questions forwarded to me. I'm sure they are in the chat, but the chat has, I mean, the questions are now at 139. So I'm not seeing any related right now to the questions around the leadership configuration or the Transb. There's still a lot, as you can imagine, around the master's degree, and real concern that removing the master's degree as an option is going to be problematic for also institutions of higher ed. And that is a question that came up. Removing the requirement, the only pathway to be a master's degree, will have some impact on teacher preparation programs that offer these. Has there been any consideration of that impact, considering we are still struggling with attracting students to our programs and to the teaching profession?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I can say a couple of things, and then Bill, you can follow if you want. The first is, it is important to recognize that both the proposal around professional and the transitional proposal, both of those are as much about recruiting individuals into the teaching profession who otherwise would choose not to become teachers, as they are about improving the process for individuals who have already made the choice to become a teacher, right? So part of this really is about expanding access and opportunity for individuals who might otherwise just simply choose not to pursue a career in teaching, even though they would make a great teacher, right? So I do want to start with that that point. The second point I will say is, you know, as Bill said it at the beginning, and I think he said it a couple of other times, right, is any change we make has intended consequences, but it also has unintended consequences. And we know we know that this is a potential unintended consequence of creating multiple pathways. Is it could result in lower enrollments in certain preparation programs. Like, we do understand that. What we do not want to happen is part of the strength of our system here in New York is a big state. And part of the strength of this system is that there are teachers' colleges, there are ed prep programs all across the state. And we do think that's a strength of our system here in New York. And so we wouldn't want to do anything that really had such an impact on that, right? We do want to be clear about that. And then the other thing I would say again is the master's degree is still an option here. It is one of several options, but again, it's still an option. In many instances, it's going to be someone's best option. It's going to continue to be someone's best option, right? I know I had a conversation with someone the other day about, you know, the using the master's degree for a second initial certificate in an area like special education or literacy, right? Like, if you want to be a special educator or you want to be a literacy teacher, that is still going to be your best pathway, right? And I think there are a whole host of other things, examples we could say where, you know, although there are multiple pathways, a teacher is still likely to pursue the master's degree for a variety of reasons. As Bill said, nationally, when you look at the National Center for Education Statistics, even though, again, we're only one of 3 states that has this requirement, I think the last study that the NCES did, it still said 51% of teachers held master's degrees or higher.
Yeah, and I would just say that, you know, overall, this really is part of one of the challenges for trying to put together a real comprehensive package to address all the different changes that are happening across K-12 and higher ed. You know, there's a lot of foundational things that are shifting right now related to this month. We're actually going to have a presentation on the graduation measures and what they're going to be proposing and how it's going to, you know, could change the way students go get their diploma and what pathways they might want to go through, as opposed to, you know, a more unitary structure of building up a certain amount of credits and taking a certain amount of standardized exams in just traditional pathways. And so this is now filtering into, different innovative models for how we're going to do teacher preparation and prepare our educators, whether that's residencies, apprenticeships, whether it's trying to get candidates into the classrooms a little sooner with the support of higher ed and the districts. But I will say we are definitely going to make sure that the regents and whoever are considering these proposals do understand the importance of enrollment trends in our colleges, the importance of the main pipeline, obviously, of our teacher candidates are the New York State educator preparation programs. We had a hit, just like they did nationally. If you went back about 10 to 15 years, it was a common narrative to hear that there was a major sudden decrease in education enrollment. We were up around 75 to 80,000 if you go back about 13, 14, 15 years. It slid down, pretty rapidly. And now it's kind of stabilized. And it's around, 50,000 candidates. Each year we graduate, I believe it's about 10 to 13, 14,000 candidates, completers. And it is something we definitely have to keep our eye on when we're balancing out, a lot of these innovative pathways and how our teacher preparation programs. But I will say this is forcing us to really start thinking about how are we going to, work with these different innovative models of residency, apprenticeship, alternative preparation models, and saying to the teacher preparation program, saying to themselves, how are we going to make sure we adapt to really making sure that we are part of this P20 continuum in much more creative ways than we've ever done in the past, and if we don't do that, unfortunately, it's really going to result in, in solutions that are not being fully realized, that we're trying to work through related to our pipeline and educator diversity and all of the other moving parts that are happening right now related to educating students in our school districts and trying to figure out different ways to do much more rich preparation for our teacher candidates.
Great. Thank you so much, Bill and Alex. We just are a little bit over time, but we really appreciate you taking the time and presenting all this information and trying to get to our questions. I want to remind the participants, we will be sending a link. If you didn't get it from the chat, we'll send it to all the folks who registered to give feedback, not only on this presentation, but also on your thoughts related to some of these proposed changes and changes that are being considered, so that NYSAID and NIACTE can put it in a format that we can share with SED so that they understand all the different layers of concerns and ideas and other background information we'd like to enter into this discussion. But we really appreciate everyone being here today, and I'm sure there'll be more discussion in the future. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you to everybody. This was a great turnout. I understand about over 500 registered. I don't know how many ended up actually being able to make it to the webinar, but we really do appreciate